I'm a walker, just so you know, so I'll try and stay from not going in front of the projector. A little bit about who I am. Most of you have seen me on Twitter, although I actually haven't had one of these avatars for about a month and a half, but usually you'll find me with a soccer ball on my head. My day job, I'm director of mobile strategy at VMware. I have been there for 2.5 months. Before that, I ran mobility at Sanofi Pharmaceuticals. And I did that for 5 years, and before that, I was automated server engineering, a few other things. I have a blog, I have a mobile cast. We actually recorded a great mobile cast with Steve Wilson today, which will go up within the next week on privacy. So if you're interested, follow me or follow the mobile cast, and you'll see where it is. So to give you a little idea, I'm Mr. Mobile. And 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, Paul Madsen came to me and said, Brian, come do this. You know, mobile, identity, they overlap, they make sense. And I'd only met him on Twitter. So all I saw was this guy in a bee suit, you know, really just a donkey. And then I met him. And lo and behold, put him on the podcast, made some sense. And he said, this year, come on down, let's talk about IoT, let's talk about identity and access management in the enterprise. One of the things that I've been talking about forever is if all you start with is a mobile strategy, you failed. But we're not here to talk about mobile. But amazingly, if all you start with is an IoT strategy, the same thing applies. And this is an identity conference. Most people here actually, all they care about is an identity and access management strategy. That doesn't work. If you don't start with your biz strategy, you've already failed. Because your business is what you're trying to drive forward and you're trying to help. I lived it for so many years. And it doesn't matter which one of these things we're talking about. So let's start talking a little bit about IoT. Anybody here not have a smartphone? Amazing. Anybody here have a BlackBerry? Just I'd like to ask. I know there's some people with Microsoft phones, but nobody, not a single hand with a BlackBerry. These are full of sensors. You're walking around carrying something with a ton of sensors on it. This is an IoT device. You have to start thinking about it this way. There's light sensors, magnetic sensors, GPS, noise, pressure sensors. There's actually a pressure sensor in here. You can use it to see how high you go. That's how it measures your height. That's the size of a sensor, blown up. Really small. But here's the problem. A sensor isn't mobile. An IoT isn't just another mobile device. You can't stick a square peg into a round hole. So what makes up IoT? You start with sensors. You're going to add connectivity, APIs, and big data. But IoT isn't any one of those things. It's the combo of all those things coming together. Paul Madsen would love me for this. If you can do a Venn diagram, you're doing well. But when we talk about IoT, one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about is wearables. And I'm sorry, wearables are such a small subset of IoT. If everybody in the world had a wearable, that's 6 billion wearables. You look at the latest thing right now, they're talking about 100 billion IoT devices. Wearables are just a pimple on the face of IoT. And yes, you can actually find these images on Google. Steve helped me with this one. But when you're talking about IoT, you have to start looking at big data. And the problem with big data is it's like drinking from a fire hose. You go to the water fountain, you're looking for just one little thing, and the spray comes at you and knocks you over. And how do you handle it? And you start putting sensors in everything. This is just a single jet engine. Actually, this one talks about a 787. But if you look at it, Boeing also has a quote about a single jet engine will generate terabytes of data. They're throwing out data, and that's only what they keep. And that's from a single flight. And by the way, that's not a long flight. That's not like I flew from the East Coast to here. That generates many terabytes. You can actually get petabytes if you collected everything and threw nothing away. So when you start collecting data like they do with the jet engines, you have to have a purpose. You have to know why you're doing this. And this is a big one here. This is my definition of IoT. IoT is connected sensors that provide you with data that allows you to make contextual decisions and then act. If you don't have context, your data is useless. I don't care what we're talking about. By the way, this sound familiar with identity and access management? You need context. If you can't act on that data, what's the point of, I made a decision, but I can't do anything about it? You know, those of you that are, look, I love my wife, but there's some decisions I know it doesn't matter what I decide, we're going with her thing. It happens every single time. You know, the expression that I used to use is, I may be the head of the family, she's the neck that turns the head. If you can't act on your decisions, it doesn't matter. And what IoT does is it gives you the data that allows you to act on those things. But you still have to throw it into a business process. You have to know what you're doing this for. So you come up with these functions, you figure out how to do it. But wait, there's still challenges out there. Who does the data belong to? Does it belong to me? Does it belong to the company? Does it belong to this division of the company? Now, all of a sudden, we're starting to get into how do we figure out who it belongs to? Identity starts to creep in here. Who can access it? If it's my data, I have an Apple Watch on it. Right now, it'll tell me, and before this, I had a Jawbone, and I've had an Android watch. It would tell me how far I walked, would tell me if I hadn't moved in a while, could actually know how long I was sitting down working at my desk. That stuff becomes interesting. Do you want to share that? Should you share that? They actually have a new one that'll tell you the mood you're in. Who can access that data? Well, now let's walk down to a lab and instrument that. We put sensors in there. Should the whole company be able to access that? Or should the people who can act on that be able to access it? When we're talking about hundreds of billions of IoT devices, do we have the tools to manage identity across it? The answer is we're building them. We can do it in some cases. Some cases we roll it out and we don't put those tools on it, and we're going to do it later because people haven't figured out they're there yet. But then the question becomes, where does privacy fit in? Now think about this. I was talking about a wearable before. If you think this doesn't happen, there are places that this happens. A lot of places it's illegal, but there are places that this happens. Now, the good news is we have regulations for it. So my old company gave me a Fitbit. Went on my waist, I could use it, but it was for healthcare. So I had to actually do certain things to reduce my insurance premiums for them. Worked great. But Sanofi didn't get to see that data. But what happens when they can start to see that data? What do they do with that data? What decisions do they make? So we talked about, this is my concept of IoT and where it all fits in. But around all of that is identity. Because how do we know what context we're in? How do we know who can access that data? Who controls it? Where's the device? What are we doing? Do devices have their own identity? This is a question you have to ask. And when we're talking privacy, privacy and access, it may be different for a device, but should certain devices have privacy, be able to keep their data to themselves? It becomes a very interesting question when you're an enterprise. And I talk about hundreds of billions of devices. This is an eye chart. It comes from Beecham Research. Every single one of these is a place that's currently using sensors and doing IoT. Do not try and read that. It will be the only eye chart in here. I put it in there purposely for you to just see what your choices are and what's out there. And then the Mr. Wilson. Does everybody know what a Coca-Cola Freestyle Machine is? They don't have these in Australia yet. Anybody not know what it is? So most of you have seen this. This is a Coke machine. It's, the old ones You go to Burger King, you go to McDonald's, and they put the machine outside. You go and you can fill up your, they gave you a cup and you filled up whatever flavor you wanted. This is a little different. You go up, it's got a touch screen, you pick your flavors. And you're not limited to one kind of flavor. So there aren't 100 flavors in there, although it's capable of 100 flavors. So there's Coke Zero in there, but there's also some cherry syrup, there's some orange syrup, there is some vanilla syrup. So you can actually get Coke Cherry, Coke Zero Cherry, you can get Coke Cherry Vanilla, you can get Coke Cherry Orange, Coke Zero Cherry Orange. It becomes very interesting what you can do with this, but what happens, and by the way, this is the case, what happens when you put sensors in that and you start reading it? If I'm the person who owns the restaurant, I know when I'm running out of syrup. I don't have to say every month place an order for 3 bottles. I can now place an order when I need it. So I know I'm running out of Coke Zero syrup. I can get that syrup delivered to me when I need it as opposed to buying 3 bottles earlier and having it left over and having to find storage space, having to figure out, pay for it first before they've bought the drinks. And oh, by the way, drinks are extremely profitable. Even when you refill 5 or 6 times, they're still making money off you because it's mostly the carbonated water. But how much carbon dioxide? Because you need that to get carbon in your drink, carbonated water. But here's a better one. What flavors are people picking? So we're in San Diego right now. If we walk into, I don't know if you have Fuddruckers here, but you walk into a restaurant with this. Let's say it's Burger King or McDonald's and they have one of these. If we know what flavors people are picking in San Diego, might they be different than what people are picking in New York? Different population, different people here. What if people here really like Coke Cherry Zero Orange? If I'm Coca-Cola and I get some of that data, maybe what I do is I start bottling Coke Cherry Orange and selling it on the shelves because I know people want that. What's that do to my profit when I actually know what people want versus guessing? Do I have leftover product? What can I do to monetize this? And oh, by the way, does Coke want this data going to Pepsi? Absolutely not. They don't want Pepsi to put out Pepsi Orange or Diet Pepsi Orange or Pepsi Max Orange, whichever is the right flavor. I'm not a Pepsi drinker, I apologize. It's not one of those things I can tell you the flavors. But think about it. What happens when weather changes? So they're doing this right now. There are sensors in this. They are actually getting readings. They're using this data. This is an enterprise that's figured out I can use this data to know what's going on with my customers. Anybody ever heard of the Sociometric Badge? So the Sociometric Badge is a badge like what you're wearing right now. Big privacy issues. It records everything you say at work. And what you do is you get this for the whole company or for a group of people at the company, and they do some neat stuff because the company doesn't actually hear what you're saying, but what Sociometric can do is figure out how you interact with others, both during times of the day, but how people receive what you're saying. So if I'm talking with Eli right here, and I lean forward while I'm talking to him, they can figure that out. They can also figure out how he responds. All because there's a microphone, there's an infrared sensor. This is a wearable, and again, your company doesn't see anything you say. It's not that, I was telling a joke or anything else, but I know tone. I know how it was received. I can see the conversation. Could you use this in your business to get, if you need to train people? Or you have somebody who's doing really well, a good salesman or something else, figure out what they're doing and then use that data for other people? But they had to solve the privacy issues. When you first hand these out and people know you're recording them, how do you react? How do you let people know? Who has access to that data? So remember we're talking identity access manager. Who has access to that data? And what can that company do to prove to you that the things you say don't go back to your own company? Because you may tell an off-color joke, and the other person may not mind, but that can get you in trouble. You may do something else. Those are things you have to think about. But IoT isn't anything new. You just saw Matt Cochran from GE talk about here. They're huge into IoT. But everybody here's got a printer in their company. Many, many moons ago, one of the things I owned was printer management. HP actually has software that tells me when the paper runs out, when there's a jam, when the toner. If I can tell my techs before somebody calls in a ticket and I can fix it, how much happier are my customers? But do I want my customers to know about that? And oh, by the way, the new printers have what's called badge print, so that only the people who print the job can actually get their job. So not only do I have sensors in it, I have sensors that regulate the printing itself and tell me, yes, you can print it. What happens if that goes bad? How do I regulate then? How does that fit into my identity and access management policy? Similar to Coke. I'll bet this hotel has vending machines. This picture actually came, if I remember correctly, when I was in Australia a month and a half ago. These are vending machines. Ever walked up to a vending machine and wanted to get a thing of chips, but it was all out of the chips that you wanted, either the Fritos, the Doritos, whatever else is up there, Sun Chips? Well, you can put sensors in that. Again, like the Coke thing, you can refill it when you need to. And if you've ever watched somebody come and refill a machine, they bring 10 boxes with them. They roll the 10 boxes in. Some boxes they don't even open. What if I only bring what I need? What if I take stuff out that doesn't sell and I know before I go I'm going to take it out? And what if the money machine fails? And again, customer data. Well, this is at your company, because my company, Sodexo, did it. At VMware, we have machines, we have stuff as well. What if I know what people want, and therefore that's what I put in the cafeteria, that's what I put in the machines, so I make them happier? They don't know I'm doing it. And, oh, by the way, should that data be private, what you're eating from the machine? How do you approach that? And these are all things you have to think about, but from a business standpoint, putting sensors here is huge. I come from the pharmaceutical industry. These are a bunch of mixing machines that we use, and we had sensors on all of them. We knew exactly what temperature it was at, how fast it was mixing, where it was in the cycle, if there was a problem with power. And by the way, the FDA wanted most of that data, they didn't want all of it. But for us, we could maximize what we were making because we put sensors on it. But it doesn't matter if you don't have context. Context is what kills you here. Because if you don't know why you're collecting the data and what form it comes in, who cares? You think this is funny. I know people that pay money that have coffee makers that have their cup of coffee ready for them when they wake up. And what if your toast is done? What if your meal is cooked? This is money here. Context is important because it's 6 a.m. and I do this every morning. I drink a cup of coffee. But does context ever get creepy? And how do we get with proactive assistance? How do we get the knowledge that we need? Where's that identity come in? When I ask a question and it can't answer it. Or even creepier, hang on. Anybody here have a Nest alarm or a Nest smoke detector? What happens? Now, switch this around a little bit. If you actually have a Nest, the more systems you connect to it, the higher value that Nest provides you. I'm out of the house right now. My wife likes the temperature 5 degrees warmer than me. She hates summer because I turn the air conditioning on. If my Nest knows that I'm out of the house and she's there, does it come up with a new schedule, which, by the way, means that my air conditioning is running less? Save money? Now apply this to the system of my company now has sensors on the lights. VMware does it, Sanofi did. If I'm not in an office, it turns those lights off. If a whole floor is not being used, maybe I should turn the air off on that floor because I don't have to cool it, or in the winter I don't have to heat it. But without identity, do you actually want it to know your guest or your illness or fitness? What's Nest doing with that data? That's why you have to read those privacy policies. You have to understand where it's going. And realize that your smartphone becomes the window to the world. Sensors, they're all in here. Talked about this before. This is your remote control for IoT if you do it in your house. The smart home, you're using this. You may be using a laptop at work. But let's look at another scenario when identity really becomes important. I tell you, I'm wearing an Apple Watch. And this is a Microsoft HoloLens. What can I do with those if I link those with identity and access management and get the stuff I need to the right person? Let me explain what I mean. Anyone know what this is? Oops. Anybody know what this is? This is a factory for building fighter jets. This is huge. I don't know if you have a concept of how big this is. This is bigger than the size of this hotel. What if I'm a technician in there and there's a problem in there? So I'm walking around, I'm doing whatever, all of a sudden I get a notification on my Apple Watch. There's a problem in Area 6, you need these tools. Great. I walk in there, I have my HoloLens on, I do this because I don't know where Area 6 is. All of a sudden, because the HoloLens can do it, a red pointer comes up when I look at a specific part of the factory. I walk over there. It's a specific machine. Because there are sensors on the machine, it knows where the jam is. It knows what the problem is. I can walk right to it. On my way there, I can either use my HoloLens or my Apple Watch to call up the manuals I'm going to need when I get there. How quickly can I repair that? How much time did I not waste by figuring out where it was, what I needed, taking a walk out there, figuring out what it was, walking back to get the manual, then walking back. Oh, I left my wrench there. Let me go get the wrench. Now I'm driving over in the thing. What if I can do that? Now, by the way, do you want your U.S. congressman to know that that machine broke down and there was a slight delay, since he's the one who passed the bill that put the money into it, or does he take that money and put it elsewhere? It doesn't necessarily matter, but that's where the boundaries of identity and access management become important. But there's still challenges. Lack of standards across everything. Forget identity for a minute. We have standards bodies in identity. But how do we fit that into chips? Not every chip, not every sensor you get has the ability to store an identity, has an ability to do an access table. How do we know who can see what gets collected? Security challenges. Well, if the stuff's not in there, how do we know who gets access to it? And if it's open to everybody else? If you read recently, there was a hospital that threw a blood gas machine. Somebody pivoted through the blood gas machine to actually get on the hospital network and create havoc. Why? Because the security wasn't in that device, which had sensors and everything else, but it was connected. You have privacy challenges, not just yours. Who should the machine be broadcasting to? Should someone be able to go into that blood gas machine, not only kill you, but know how you're actually doing because they can see your readings? Speed of business isn't going to slow down. We want solutions. When I was there, the question wasn't, hey, can you do this? It was, we're rolling out this project. What are you doing to support us? And all levels of the technology stack have to come together. They're not together in IoT. They're not together in identity. And you need both. Remember, my picture is identity surrounds this whole stack. So how do we IoT the enterprise? Put sensors on everything. It's the data. If you can't get the data, it doesn't help you. Build a secure API to access that data. Wrap identity around it. And what's the last one? And then build apps that access that data through the API and prove identity. The right people who can make those contextual decisions and then act need to be able to access that data. But in the end, know what biz process you're building for? Because remember, I started with, if all you have is a mobile, identity, IoT strategy, you've already failed. If you start with the biz strategy and weave your mobile IoT, IAM strategy into it, you're on your path to success because it's a biz strategy, it's not an IT strategy. And that's part of where you start. Questions? I think time's up, but I'm the last one of the day, so I'm told I have 1 minute. A little bit different type of presentation than you've seen, but any questions? Well, that was quick. Easy, painless. Last one of the day, so it's kind of, you guys get to go off and, is it a break or is it, yes, and then I wouldn't miss that session. That's going to be a good one. I know Rob Miller, I know some of the questions he's going to ask the keynoters. You want to see that.